Now let's go to a more positive thing going on. And that is the new Labyrinth album. In the Vanishing Echoes of Goodbye came out back on January 17th, 2025. Really excited for this record. I was really blown away by this album as well. So I have followed Labyrinth for about 26, 27 years. I remember the debut album, which really didn't have the greatest production on it, but Fabio Leone sang on the debut. But then they had an album come out called Return to Heaven Denied. And it's still to this day one of the most incredible speed metal, melodic metal, power metal albums that I've ever heard. And then shortly after, Metal Blade put out the Timeless Crime EP. Again, this was kind of the infancy of speed metal and melodic metal sort of making a comeback. So I really loved those two releases. Then the Sons of Thunder album came out, and there's a big controversy over that. I'll talk about that here in a second. But realistically, this band has been kind of hit or miss for me over the years. Now, Olaf had left and formed a band called Vision Divine, which I think is an excellent band. And what he's done with Vision Divine is awesome. And then he ended up coming back to Labyrinth, which really made me happy because here's the thing about Olaf. Olaf Thorson has a much different style of playing than the other guys in Labyrinth do. He's got a different set, a really different set of influences, I think. And when you listen to them, and you really listen to, because the music has a little bit of a darker edge to it. It's not like a happy European metal sounding, power metal band. I mean, they definitely have a more epic, more darker vibe to their music than, say, a lot of the other European bands do. But he was influenced by a lot of thrash bands. And you could hear that in his playing on these records. And that combination with a more melodic approach, I think, is great. And here's Olaf talking about his favorite thrash bands. One of them being the band Toxic, which I actually absolutely love. Check out this interview clip where he talks about his influences. Check it out.
But all those bands who fought me as a musician, as a guitarist, were coming from the United States. I was in love with most American bands like Mordred, Anthrax. You mentioned whatever you want from America back then, and I was studying and practicing over those bands. Of course, at the same time, I didn't want to copy them, and I underline, of course, I'm not American, so my influences, my history, my culture is Italian, hence European. But I was really finding so weird that we have been pushed into the European power metal, which it may even be right, but you understand my point of view. I always struggled with this because it sounded like it wasn't completely fitting the band.
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned that. There are bands in when you talk about American power metal, you always have a little bit of a much darker sound to the music, as opposed to in Europe, it's a little bit not lighter, but not as dark. Probably a little happier.
Yeah.
And
we were calling the European power metal in the early days happy metal.
Yeah, right. And I don't feel Labyrinth is happy metal. I would say that they are a little bit more of a darker thing. Yeah. So so you're big on thrash metal. So did you grow up on like the Bay Area scene, like Exodus or Testament?
Absolutely. Yeah. All the bands you mentioned, I know every album from them. One of my all-time favorite bands, Mordred, Forbidden. So I'm in love with that kind of music, that style. The Bay Area has been a big influence to me as a guitarist. My favorite band, my favorite guitarist is a band, I guess you know them, it's Toxic.
Okay, yeah.
So the album the album was released, it blew my mind off completely. All my style, what you can hear without the album from Toxic, I wouldn't play the things you can hear and listen to on Return to Heaven Denied.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I've had Josh, the guitar player, on my show.
Josh Christian Gross is my god, my guitar god.
Yeah, and they had a new album come out, and that album was phenomenal. Yeah, that dude is. I mean, he's actually a really nice guy, And that dude really, I mean, he has such a unique playing style for thrash metal that like if I hear him play, I can tell it's him because he doesn't sound like anybody, not even in
Absolutely.
heavy metal, but even in thrash metal in general. And it's interesting you mention that because those first two Toxic albums are so
Yeah,
ahead of
what's
their time.
interesting? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. They were coming from another dimension. Imagine back then. I mean, it was uh, such a new music. It was trash, but there
hmm
was much more than trash. The voice, especially in Think This, was so melodic, and they even added a ballad. There's Still the Fence was the song, and,
yeah,
and and it was not belonging to a trash album. So
yeah,
I was a teenager, and I was saying, "What's going on? There's something going on here. There's something new coming," and that's when I got these influences, and I say, I don't want to be put into a single style and play the same song forever and ever.
yeah. No, and again, that's cool, man, because not many people mention some of the lesser known thrash bands that were really good. So, because they came out with an album, Dismorta, not long ago, Toxic did, and that album was like it was insane how good that record
Really,
was.
yeah, absolutely. You
Yeah.
said the right word, insane. Great
and
album. I
that's
loved
the
it.
best way to describe his songwriting because it's so different from everybody. I That's the best way to describe it for me, and insane in a good way, you know. And so, yeah, it's interesting you say that because when I do listen to a lot of these songs that you've put out, and even stuff that you've done over the years, I do hear in your guitar playing, especially your rhythm playing, I hear a little bit of thrash metal in that, but because
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
because you're writing different kinds of songs, but those elements exist. I think it's cool that you mentioned that band. Definitely.
Of course, I don't want to copy anyone,
Yeah.
but my roots come from there. Definitely,
Oh,
definitely.
and that is Olaf talking about his favorite bands. The guy grew up on thrash metal and loves a lot of these thrash metal bands. Mordred is a band I haven't heard in a long time, but he talks about Toxic. And it's interesting because I think that Toxic is just a ridiculously, criminally underrated band. I mean, they are just an absolutely monster band. And Josh Christian, he's a really cool dude. I have an interview with him on this program. The last album Toxic put out, Dismorta, was phenomenal. Then you have Think This, World Circus. I mean, these albums, when those came out, were really ahead of their time. Nobody was playing anything like that. And even to this day, with thrash metal being around as long as it has, nobody plays anything like them. So Olaf definitely referenced them as a big influence. And you can hear a little bit of that in his music because when you listen to Labyrinth, there's a lot of twists and turns in some of those songs that you really don't expect on this album. So if I'm comparing this album to their past works, I think it is, most people, when they listen to Labyrinth, most people think Return to Heaven Denied is like the album. And this new Labyrinth album, I think, is just as good, maybe even better. I think it rivals Return to Heaven Denied. A lot of people still go back to that album, but I got to be honest. In the Vanishing Echoes of Goodbye is a tremendous release. And, I'm really happy, and they've been slowly coming. I mean, the last Labyrinth album I thought was very good as well. I think I gave it an 8 out of 10. This one is a drastic improvement for me. It is a 10 out of 10. The album is simply that good. There's a lot of great melodies in it. It's definitely much heavier, has a little more speed metal as far as the speed metal elements to it, more than the last few albums. But generally speaking, it is an awesome record. And it's one that is a definite album of the year candidate. And with that being said, I don't know what it is, but I'm getting so many great records to start off this year. This album's a 10 out of 10. It really is that good. So that is my review for it. Now, for those of you that have followed the band and want to revisit something that happened in the band's past, the follow-up to Return to Heaven Denied, which was a very highly anticipated album called Sons of Thunder, you had a controversy over it because the mix didn't sound great. There was a lot of stuff missing from the album that should have been on it. It was released when, it probably shouldn't have been. But I did ask Olaf to go into that story and talk about it in great detail. And I want you guys, before I end this podcast off, I want you all to check out this interview clip where we do talk about that. Check this out. The craziness surrounding the Sons of Thunder album when that came out.
Yeah.
I remember it came out, and then it was kind of like there was a bad mix on it, and then it ended up getting remixed. And maybe talk a bit about that, because I thought that record with the songs that were on it were great progression from what Return to Heaven Denied, what the kind of music you wrote on that. And then there was this huge, I don't know, controversy, fight, or whatever the case maybe was going on with that record at the time. I remember getting the Japanese version of it, and it was a little bit different than and stuff. So let's talk about that, because that's an interesting story.
Yeah, sure. No, there's no big secret behind it, and there's no problem with talking about it. First of all, it's been everything and the contrary of everything has been said about that album. Mm-hmm. And since this negative atmosphere going around it, after 20 years, we perceive it as an album which did really bad. Let me tell you, it didn't at all. Sales-wise, Return to Heaven Denied sold much less than Songs of Thunder. So the album went in the charts, and it sold really good. So the reason why we're talking this way about it is that, as you can hear when you listen to it, things were not going good. Why? What happened? Well, it's long story short. Our label, after the success of Return to Heaven Denied, of course, wanted to push things to a higher level. And the first move was to hire a producer, namely Neil Cannon. Neil Cannon is a great producer. He just realized some very good albums. The last one I remember before us was producing Nevermore.
Yeah.
So it looked like being the right guy for the band. And anyway, we were still young and not so experienced to say no or to try something different. I remember our personal choice was Wagner, the producer from Megadeth. But it didn't. It wasn't possible. It was too busy at the time. So we say, okay, let's go with Neil Cannon. Why not? I mean, Nevermore are a great band, and they were sounding actually great. So let's do this.
And the thing is, too, he's produced a lot of different, really, been involved with great bands, pop bands, metal bands,
Spiral Architecture, many complicated bands. So there was no reason to say it wouldn't be right. What we realized during the recordings, it was completely. How can I say? It was not connected with the music we wanted to realize. Our music was, when he was commenting during the pre-production, he said our music was too complicated in a funny way. Not that we play like architects, Spiral Architecture or Spastic Inc., but he was saying our music was unnecessarily complicated for the style. And he wanted to cut things, and he wanted to make everything sounds in more straight. I don't know how to explain this. Anyway, there was some disagreement with this, but again, we were too young, so we said, okay, you do whatever you want. And the next step during the recordings, an example, was to cut all the solos off. Almost most of the solos were cut. He didn't want the album to have many solos, because he said that the solos don't belong to this kind of music. And so on and so on. The atmosphere in the studio was really, really bad, really bad. The best player has been sent home right after a few minutes starting the recording. He didn't like the style, so we had to call a sessionist to complete the best parts. And then we went with the guitars. The keyboards were completely cut, and so on. excuse me a second, and so on. Anyway, when the mix happened, he chose not to have the band around. So he took everything and he went, I think it was in Texas. He went to a studio in Texas to mix it alone. And he sent the master straight to the label, not even to us. We had no chance to listen to the
Right.
master, to the mix. And it was not us, but it was the label who, back then, Metal Blade, from their base in Stuttgart, Germany, they flew to Milano. We have been called to Milano. We listened to the mix, and they were informing us the mix was horrible and totally unacceptable.
Yeah.
No guitar solos. I think like two or three guitar solos were left. Most of them were have been replaced with some weird synth, I don't know, whatever arrangement. The vocals have been reduced in terms of choirs, and it was sounding completely different from what you can hear now in the final master. So
Right.
uh, at that point, as a band, we expected the label to give us, I don't know, 1 month to redo things, but they actually gave us 1 week to remix it,
Right.
and we had no producer anymore. So the only thing we could do was to hire the same studio guy who did the recordings, and he had to remix the whole album in less than 1 week. Remixing also meant to re-record guitar solos and some other stuff which were missing because what he didn't add to the master was erased. We had nothing left. So I remember myself recording solos at 3 a.m. in the morning, like Rage of Kings. The song "The Rage of the King." It's me playing a solo at 3 a.m. in a studio with some random amplifier because the stuff was not there anymore.
Right.
And this was the recipe to a big disaster, of course, in terms of sound wise, production wise.
Correct.
But we had no more control on that. I mean, the label came, took the master, they listened to the final version, they said, okay, that sounds good enough, let's go. And they released it because they already had pre-sales, and they wanted to keep it hot and they wanted to put it out and sell it. So that's how it went.
Sure. Did that, that whole crazy situation, was that part of the reason you left the band to begin with? Like, I know you were out of the band for quite a while, and
Definitely,
yeah.
definitely. I totally disagree. I would never let that album be released that way. Uh, what I say, it's strengthened. It's stronger now than back then, of course. But what I was saying back then, I know how to produce an album,
Hmm.
which I did. Now in these days, I'm still producing my own music, and that's the moment when I have learned I am going to produce my own music. But back then, I was a young guitarist, and I was really pissed off because I said I am not willing to have this album released the way it sounds because the songs are there. Just give it a new sound. Just if needed, let's redo it. No problem. I can do it
Right.
in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks. Let's redo this and give it the proper production it deserves. I didn't find any support, even from the other guys. But I don't think they're guilty for this. We were too young.
Yeah.
And and when business pushes you and everyone around says you can't delay the release. Let's put it out. I understand now that some other guys agreed with this plan, and I say, okay, I call myself out
Yeah.
because I was losing the control over my music, and it's the worst thing it may happen to you as a musician, I think.
Sure. Yeah. So you basically proceeded then with Vision Divine for a long time, and
Yeah,
put out some great records. I mean, I remember you had a second album, then Streams of Consciousness was probably,
yeah,
it's actually still one of my favorite records you've ever done.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that just had, obviously Vision Divine is a bit different from Labyrinth in how a lot of those records sound, which, people would say that's power metal, but I would tell people that it's a different sounding band and in many ways. But yeah, you did that for a while. And that is Olaf Thorson talking about the situation surrounding the Sons of Thunder album, which the songs were good, but it was crazy when they first released that, how terrible it sounded. So with that being said, favorite songs, honestly, my favorite song in the album is the last song, Inhuman Race. Welcome Twilight, Accept the Changes, Out of Place, The Healing. These are all really incredible tracks, among some of the best Labyrinth songs and the best songs that Olaf and company have ever created. So I absolutely dig this record. Hey everybody, Tony here from the Metal Command podcast. Again, I appreciate your support. Since 1998, I have hosted this show in one form or another, starting off in radio and now in the podcast format. Again, thanks for watching, and if you like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, please hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video, and if you see this program on any other form of social media, please give me a follow there. Again, I always appreciate your support.